And it was to some extent about the loss of Syd Barrett, succumbed to mental illness 7 or 8 years before. Ebullient, talented friend, and I miss him.
Roger Waters is not the kind of artist who wins people over at first glance. He doesn't flash a charming smile, doesn't make easy statements, and doesn't follow anyone's lead. But once you step into his world, where each song is a call from memory, an unhealed wound, a question left unanswered, you won't come out the same. As the creative mastermind behind The Wall, The Dark Side of the Moon, and Wish You Were Here, the masterpieces that made Pink Floyd one of the greatest bands of all time, Roger Waters is more than a musician. He is a storyteller, an indignant poet, a son forever searching for the shadow of the father he lost before he even understood the world. Yet while his music has built bridges for millions of lonely souls, Waters himself has become increasingly estranged from those he once called friends, bandmates, and family. He constructed sonic walls that commanded the respect of the world, only to be imprisoned by those very walls for life. The story of Roger Waters is not just about the glory of a musical genius. It is also a story of isolation, pain, and endless battles with former allies, with the world, and with himself. And it stands as the clearest proof that sometimes, to become a legend, you must accept being misunderstood forever. Early life. Roger Waters was born on September 6, 1943, in the town of Great Bookham, Surrey, England, at a time when World War II was still ravaging Europe. His father, Eric Fletcher Waters, was a teacher, writer, and pacifist who once opposed military involvement. But when Britain entered the war against fascism, he abandoned his non-violent ideals and joined the Royal Fusiliers. Less than a year later, on February 18, 1944, Eric was killed in action during the Battle of Anzio in Italy, when Roger was just 5 months old. Waters never knew his father. All he had was a faded black-and-white photo, a few lines of biography, and scattered stories from his mother. But that loss wasn't just the absence of a man, it became the emotional axis of his entire life. That formless grief echoes throughout works like The Wall, The Final Cut, and When the Tigers Broke Free. Waters once bitterly admitted, "I didn't cry for losing my father, because I never got the chance to know I had him." His mother, Mary White, was a resilient and principled woman, a language teacher, and an active member of the British Communist Party. She raised her 2 sons in a home filled with books, politics, and discipline. In Roger's mind, she was an intelligent but emotionally distant figure, one who helped him build a tough exterior, but also left him with a heart starved for familial affection. There were no comforting words or warm embraces, only intellect, ideals, and societal rules. The family moved to Cambridge in the late 1940s. It was there that Roger attended Cambridgeshire High School for Boys, where he met Syd Barrett, the future founding leader of Pink Floyd. In Cambridge, he also became acquainted with David Gilmour, a quiet teenager with a deep passion for the guitar, destined to shape the band's future. After high school, Roger was accepted into Regent Street Polytechnic in London, now the University of Westminster, majoring in architecture. But his true passion lay in music and ideas. At the Polytechnic, he met Nick Mason and Richard Wright, his future bandmates. Though still studying construction, Roger had already begun using music as a tool to engage with the world, posing questions far larger than any blueprint. Why is war legal? Why do we believe in leadership? Why can't people live with each other in truth? From a boy without a father, raised in emotional austerity, Roger Waters didn't choose to be a loud rebel. He chose to become a musical debater. And those unanswered questions would soon become lyrics, angry, haunting, profound, and uncomfortable, just like his life. Early career. When Roger Waters stepped into the lecture halls of Regent Street Polytechnic in the early 1960s, he had no idea he would become the soul of one of the greatest bands of the 20th century. He was studying architecture, a practical choice to please his mother. But what truly ignited him were music, philosophy, and politics. And it was there, in a basement thick with cigarette smoke and guitars, that he met two friends who would help him change the course of rock history, Nick Mason and Richard Wright. The band started out under various names like Sigma 6, the Abdabs, and the T-Set. But it wasn't until Syd Barrett, Waters' childhood friend from Cambridge, joined that the group began to shape its identity: psychedelic, experimental, dreamy, and deeply unstable. They officially adopted the name the Pink Floyd Sound, later shortened to Pink Floyd, inspired by American blues musicians Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. At that time, Waters was still just the bassist and the guy in charge of logistics. It was Syd Barrett who drew all the attention. Handsome, eccentric, a brilliant songwriter and magnetic on stage. Their debut album, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, 1967, bore Barrett's unmistakable stamp with its hallucinatory sounds and surreal lyrics, but that brilliance faded quickly. His heavy LSD use and deteriorating mental health led to a breakdown within a year. He would often freeze on stage, forget lyrics, or play the same note for minutes on end. Pink Floyd had no choice but to replace him with David Gilmour, an old friend of Waters with deep regret and lingering trauma. It was in this chaos that Roger Waters began to rise as a quiet leader. With Barrett gone, the band fell into a creative crisis, and it was Waters who redefined their artistic direction. He steered Pink Floyd away from worn-out psychedelia and toward a conceptual style rich in philosophical, social, psychological, and anti-war themes. From A Saucerful of Secrets, 1968, to Metal, 1971, Waters increasingly took control of the band's lyrics and conceptual framework. While Gilmour and Wright still played crucial musical roles, it was Waters who told the stories, asked the questions, and guided the emotional arc. He began mining his own obsessions: war, the loss of his father, society's decay, and turning them into art. Atom Heart Mother, 1970, and especially Metal, with its sweeping epic echoes, marked Pink Floyd's evolution from an experimental band into one chasing grand ideas. But those were just the first bricks. Roger Waters was quietly preparing a revolution, not just in music, but in how audiences experience the world. His early career didn't blaze like the fire that once burned in Syd Barrett. It simmered, endured, and gradually took hold like an underground current. And once Waters seized full control of the band's artistic vision, Pink Floyd ceased to be just a musical group. They became a philosophical journey, and Roger Waters, once a quiet bassist, became the guide. Yet at the very same time, that control began to show the first signs of fracture. Career success. Roger Waters never needed theatrics to achieve greatness. When he wrote lyrics, Pink Floyd ceased to be just a band. It became a consciousness machine, shining a harsh light on war, madness, capitalism, and human alienation. From the early 1970s, Waters assumed the role of artistic leader within Pink Floyd, shaping the band's signature conceptual style, rich in philosophy, politics, and psychological depth. The turning point came with The Dark Side of the Moon, 1973, an album for which Waters wrote all the lyrics. Themes like death, time, social pressure, and mental illness were woven into a seamless structure, blending innovative sound design and electronic effects. The album sold over 45 million copies and stayed on the Billboard chart for 741 consecutive weeks, a record. It wasn't just a commercial triumph. It cemented Pink Floyd's status as a pioneer of progressive rock. In 1975, they released Wish You Were Here, a tribute to Syd Barrett, the founding member who had collapsed under the weight of LSD. The track Shine On You Crazy Diamond was both a lament and a warning about the cost of fame. The album criticized the music industry and the cold nature of stardom, topics Waters would revisit time and again. Animals, 1977, pushed the boundaries of critique further. Drawing on George Orwell's allegories, Waters attacked class stratification and modern capitalism. He portrayed the ruling elite as pigs, the predators as dogs, and the passive masses as sheep. By this point, Waters had taken near-total control over the band's content, gradually edging his bandmates out of the creative process. But the peak, and also the deepest fracture, came with The Wall, 1979. This was a project Waters almost entirely wrote himself, rooted in his own childhood and psychological isolation. The protagonist, Pink, mirrored Roger, a boy who lost his father, was smothered by his mother, crushed by fame, and ultimately built a wall to shut out the world. The album sold over 30 million copies, was followed by a massive world tour, and later adapted into a controversial film. However, The Wall also laid bare the internal tensions. Waters forced Richard Wright out of the band. On the final cut, 1983, he seized complete creative control, sidelining Gilmour and Mason from the production. The album was intensely personal, dedicated to his late father and steeped in disillusionment with Thatcher's government. In 1985, Waters announced his departure from Pink Floyd, believing the band couldn't continue without him. But Gilmour and Mason retained the name and kept releasing albums. Waters sued, but lost in 1987, forfeiting the rights to the Pink Floyd name. He retained ownership of The Wall, but left bitterly, feeling betrayed by the very people who had once shared the stage as brothers. Roger Waters' career success is indisputable, but it came at a steep price: fractured relationships, personal isolation, and a rift that never fully healed among those who once made magic together. Waters turned music into a weapon, and that very weapon turned back on him, in ways no hit song could ever soothe. Controversies and hidden struggles. Roger Waters' career isn't written solely in musical masterpieces. It's also etched with conflicts, controversies, and fractures that never healed. From a creative genius, he gradually became the central force controlling Pink Floyd's artistic vision, and ultimately the primary reason the band fell apart. As early as The Wall, 1979, Waters asserted near-total dominance. He forced keyboardist Richard Wright out of the group and sidelined Gilmour and Mason during the creation of the final cut, 1983. Everything revolved around him: the ideas, the lyrics, the message, the album structure. While the results were artistically powerful, the band was no longer a collective. It had become one man's stage. When Waters announced his departure in 1985, he believed Pink Floyd would dissolve. But Gilmour and Mason continued, releasing new albums, touring, and keeping the band's name. Feeling betrayed, Waters sued, but lost in 1987. Gilmour retained the rights to the Pink Floyd name, while Waters kept the rights to The Wall. From that point on, their relationship was irreparably broken. These personal rifts simmered for decades until they burst into public view. In 2023, Polly Sampson, David Gilmour's wife, called Waters an anti-Semitic, lying, disgusting man on social media. Gilmour did not deny the statement. In fact, he confirmed it as entirely true. To the public, the incident reopened old wounds, a reminder that even the greatest bands can remain forever fractured. Beyond band dynamics, Waters became entangled in global political controversies. He was a vocal supporter of the BDS movement and openly criticized Israel, even comparing the state to Nazi Germany. This drew condemnation from many Jewish organizations who labeled him anti-Semitic, boycotted his concerts, and pushed for event cancellations. The tension reached its peak in 2023 when Waters appeared on stage in Berlin wearing a long coat and red armband, imagery that strongly evoked Nazi symbolism. Although he explained it was a theatrical portrayal of a character from The Wall, German police opened an investigation for potentially violating laws banning fascist symbols. That same year, Waters addressed the United Nations Security Council at Russia's invitation, criticizing NATO and blaming the West for the war in Ukraine. While he claimed to oppose all forms of aggression, his failure to condemn Russia triggered widespread backlash, particularly from Ukraine and human rights organizations. Waters' personal life only deepens the enigma. Having gone through 5 failed marriages, he rarely speaks about his children or family. Rumors have long circulated that he is temperamental, controlling, and prone to depression. Questions about his sexuality surfaced in the 1990s, but were never confirmed. Though commanding on stage, off-stage he is a reclusive, difficult, and solitary figure. Roger Waters never sought to please the public, nor did he compromise with politics or the media. He speaks his mind, even when it costs him dearly. And because of that, he remains both an irreplaceable icon and one of the most controversial figures in modern music. A kind of artist that's hard to love, but impossible to forget. Personal life. Beneath the unwavering stance and unrelenting voice of a protest artist, Roger Waters has always wrestled with a private life marked by silence, where there are no stage lights, no applause, and no forgiveness. He once said that music was his way of speaking to the world, but in real life, he often failed to keep people close. Waters married for the first time in 1969 to his college sweetheart, Judy Trim, an art teacher and painter. The marriage lasted 6 years and ended quietly and painfully, so much so that Judy's name was nearly erased from album credits of the time. His second marriage was to Caroline Christie, a niece of staunch British conservative politician Anthony Eden. This was the height of Waters' career with Pink Floyd and the period when his son, Harry Waters, was born. But success could not save the relationship. Private life was gradually worn down by artistic obsession, endless touring, and the crushing weight of constant creativity. In 1993, Waters entered a third marriage with Priscilla Phillips, with whom he had another son. But again, the marriage collapsed in the early 2000s. His fourth marriage was to documentary filmmaker Laurie Durning in 2012. Only 3 years later, the couple divorced. The divorce file included a bizarre dispute over a Rolex watch, revealing how even the smallest things can spark conflict when trust has vanished. In 2021, at the age of 78, Waters married for the 5th time. This time to Camila Chavez, a woman 35 years his junior who once worked as his personal driver during a tour. They had kept their relationship private for years before going public. Waters claimed he was truly happy this time, though those close to him remained concerned about his reclusive tendencies and volatile temperament. Although his son Harry followed in his musical footsteps, playing keyboards on his father's solo tours, their relationship remains largely unknown. Waters rarely mentions his children in interviews, and when asked about family, he often deflects or responds briefly. Some former friends believe he has always been too immersed in his inner world to sustain long-term relationships. He has openly admitted to being hard to live with and has suffered recurring episodes of depression, particularly after leaving Pink Floyd. He has described feeling utterly empty while standing before a crowd or locking himself away for weeks just to write a few lines of lyrics. To the public, Roger Waters is a lifelong fighter against war, injustice, capitalism, and authoritarian politics. But few realize his greatest battle has been with himself, a complex soul that never felt truly loved, constantly seeking self-preservation by pushing others away. Perhaps that is why he built The Wall, not just as a musical work, but as a perfect metaphor for his personal life. Grand, but profoundly alone. Legacy and influence. Roger Waters didn't just leave behind timeless songs. He left behind an entire ideology in music. As the conceptual mastermind behind Pink Floyd's most glorious era, Waters helped transform rock from mere sound into a deep, philosophical, political, and psychological experience. From 1973 to 1983, Waters was Pink Floyd's primary lyricist and increasingly steered the band's artistic direction. Albums like The Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, Animals, and The Wall bore his unmistakable imprint, tackling themes that were virtually unheard of in rock at the time: madness, death, war, isolation, authoritarian education, identity crises, consumerism, and media manipulation. Instead of singing about love or joy, he questioned the world, dissected humanity, and took listeners on haunting inner journeys. Under Waters' guidance, Pink Floyd became a pioneer of the concept album, where songs didn't stand alone but formed a cohesive narrative. He was not just a musician, but an architect of ideas. From album structures and stage design to film adaptations and visual symbolism, every element served a unified message. It was this conceptual coherence that has kept his works resonant nearly half a century later. In his solo career, Waters continued his commitment to critical thinking and artistic experimentation. Amused to Death, 1992, is regarded as one of the most profound explorations of media manipulation in the modern age. The Wall Live Tour, 2010 to 2013, a grand revival of his 1979 masterpiece, became one of the most successful rock shows in history. And in 2023, he released The Dark Side of the Moon Redux, a slower, more reflective reimagining of the classic, like an 80-year-old man revisiting his youth through the lens of time. Though often controversial for his politics and personality, Waters' far-reaching influence is undeniable. Artists like Tom York, Radiohead, Trent Reznor, Nine Inch Nails, Steven Wilson, Porcupine Tree, and Roger Taylor, Queen, have cited him as an inspiration, not just for his music, but for his ethical stance on art, that creativity should never be indifferent to the times. Waters leaves behind a legacy that not everyone may love, but no one can ignore. It's a legacy of uncompromising spirit, unfiltered voice, and the ability to turn personal pain and social injustice into music that shakes people to their core. In an entertainment world growing increasingly shallow, that legacy might outlast the charts, because it speaks to the deepest part of us, the truth. Current life. At over 80 years old, Roger Waters is neither resting nor living off his legacy. He continues to confront the world, not with a guitar, but with his convictions. And just as he has for the past 6 decades, he remains a magnet for controversy. After wrapping up his This Is Not a Drill tour, which ran from 2022 to late 2023 with 99 shows across North America, South America, and Europe, Waters entered a new phase, reimagining, reflecting, and resisting through different forms. In October 2023, he released The Dark Side of the Moon Redux, a stripped-down, introspective, and lyrically heavy reinterpretation of his 1973 classic. Rather than chase sonic innovation, he stepped back and retold the old story with a meditative pace, like an 80-year-old man questioning himself. In early 2025, he followed it up with a super deluxe box set of the album, including high-end formats, live recordings, a documentary, and a photo book, proof that he's still creating art, not just reliving memories. Also in 2025, Waters released the concert film and live album This Is Not a Drill, live from Prague, recorded during the 2023 tour. The film premiered globally in July, with the album following in early August, affirming that while the tour may have ended, his message continues to resonate. Beyond music, Waters remains deeply engaged in international discourse, offering sharp and divisive political commentary. In 2024, he publicly supported Palestine multiple times, criticized NATO, the US, and Israel, which led BMG to cancel its publishing deal with him. In July 2024, he declared his willingness to financially support WikiLeaks and expressed hope that Julian Assange could return to justice. By July 2025, Waters openly backed Palestine Action, a group recently labeled a terrorist organization by the UK, and urged fans to stand up to be remembered. The UK government immediately warned he could face prosecution under anti-terror laws. He has not only drawn fire from political figures, but continues to face harsh backlash from Jewish, Ukrainian, and Western communities. Yet, as always, Waters refuses to apologize. "I don't sing to please," he stated. "I sing so the world has to face itself." For him, music has never been entertainment. It is resistance in its purest form. Waters now resides primarily in New York with his young wife, Camila Chavis. He has no touring plans for 2025. Instead, he's focused on writing his memoir and completing a new album titled The Bar, described as deeply personal and full of reckoning. In recent interviews, he remains sharp and fierce, though quieter, almost as if preparing for a final chapter. But not to retreat, rather, to finally say what he's never been able to say in full. Roger Waters doesn't live to be liked. At 81, he's still a thorn in the world's side, unyielding, unapologetic, and unquiet. And perhaps that's exactly how he survives. Some artists win over the public with charm, catchy melodies, or lyrics designed to please the crowd. Roger Waters doesn't belong to that world. He comes from somewhere else, where music isn't made to entertain, but to stir, to question, to force listeners to confront what's uncomfortable. He never tried to be likable, and yet somehow, that very refusal to compromise is what made him one of the most influential artists of the 20th century. From epic concept albums to lyrics heavy with tragedy and defiance, from rock stages to political forums, Waters has always been an independent voice, unflinching, unbending. His legacy isn't just found in records or sold-out tours. It's in the way people think after hearing him. It's in how he demanded that music take a stand, carry weight, carry pain. And in a world that keeps getting easier to digest, his presence, however divisive, feels more necessary than ever. But what about you? What is it that makes you remember Roger Waters? A song, a lyric, or simply that feeling of not being able to stay indifferent when he speaks? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love deep, different stories about music, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next video. We tell the stories of music with depth, memory, and truth.